The year is 1603, and on a frozen island at the edge of the known world, an entire way of life is about to change forever. Mount Yōtei rises like a silent sentinel over the windswept landscape of Ezo, what we now call Hokkaido. But here's the thing. The indigenous Ainu people, who've called this place home for centuries, don't even know that mountain by that name yet. They call it Machine-shiri, meaning woman's mountain. The fact that the upcoming game, Ghost of Yōtei, uses the later Japanese name for this sacred peak, that's not just a creative choice, it's a haunting preview of what's coming. You're watching history deciphered with Nathan Gale. Now let's get started. The Ghost of Yōtei isn't just about one person's story of revenge. It's about the ghost of an entire culture standing on the brink of erasure and the very real struggle of a people fighting to preserve their identity against an empire that's just beginning to look north with hungry eyes. We're going to explore how 1603 marked the exact moment when the Ainu people still held power in their own lands, when the outcome wasn't predetermined, and when resistance still felt possible. Then we'll dive into the devastating economic warfare that would systematically destroy Ainu independence. And finally, we'll uncover why this forgotten chapter of history matters so much that it's become the backdrop for one of gaming's most anticipated stories. So let's set the stage, because 1603 wasn't just any year, it was the year everything changed in Japan. Picture the mainland in chaos for decades, with warlords tearing each other apart in what seemed like endless civil war. Then, just 3 years earlier, Tokugawa Ieyasu had won the decisive battle of Sekigahara, and in March 1603, he officially became shogun. This wasn't just a change in leadership, it was the birth of the Edo period, 260 years of centralized control that would reshape every corner of the Japanese archipelago. But here's where it gets interesting. While the mainland was finally experiencing peace, the northern frontier of Ezo remained a world apart, a place where the new shogun's authority was more theoretical than real. Ezo in 1603 was essentially Japan's version of the Wild West, but frozen. The Ainu people dominated this landscape, living in small villages called kotan, usually just 5 or 6 houses clustered together. But don't let that fool you into thinking this was some simple society. The Ainu had chiefs called kamoi, nobles called nispa, commoners, and even slaves. They had wealth, they had hierarchy, they had complex trading networks that stretched across the northern Pacific. Their oral traditions, the yukar, carried stories and wisdom across generations like living libraries. These weren't people waiting to be civilized. They were already running a sophisticated society that had thrived for centuries. The Japanese presence at this time was basically confined to the southern tip of the island, where the Matsumai clan had been granted control back in 1590. Think of them as the northernmost Japanese family, tasked with defending the realm and maintaining contact with the Ainu. But here's the crucial part. In 1603, the Ainu still held the upper hand in trade relationships. They controlled the resources, they set many of the terms, and they maintained significant autonomy over their own affairs. The Matsumai clan needed them more than they needed the Matsumai clan, and that balance of power was about to shift dramatically. What makes this moment so perfect for a story about resistance is that change was literally in the air. The Tokugawa Shogunate was looking north, seeing untapped resources and strategic value in controlling the frontier. The Matsumai clan was about to receive exclusive trading rights with the Ainu in 1604, just 1 year after our story begins. Fleeing Ronin and pirates were already arriving in Ezo, escaping the newly consolidated rule on the mainland and adding another layer of chaos to an already volatile situation. This is the moment when the Ainu could still fight back, when the outcome wasn't predetermined, when a single person or a single ghost might actually make a difference. Now let's talk about what that resistance was up against, because the Japanese approach to controlling Ezo was brilliant in its calculated cruelty. The Matsumai clan didn't just want to trade with the Ainu, they wanted to control them completely. The system they developed was called basho, and it was basically economic warfare disguised as commerce. Here's how it worked. Japanese merchants were granted exclusive rights to trade with specific Ainu territories, creating artificial monopolies that eliminated competition and drove down prices for Ainu goods while inflating the cost of Japanese products. But the real genius of this system was in the details. The Japanese would advance goods to the Ainu at inflated prices, creating debts that required continuous labor to repay. They used something called idawara, or barbarian bales, which were deliberately smaller than standard trading units, effectively raising prices even higher. The Ainu were forbidden from trading with anyone else, trapped in a system designed to create dependency. Imagine being a skilled hunter who's traded bear pelts for iron tools for generations, only to suddenly find yourself forced to accept whatever terms one merchant offers, with no ability to shop around or negotiate fairly. This wasn't just about making money, it was about breaking the spirit of independence. The Japanese deliberately overfished salmon runs that the Ainu depended on for survival, forced them to overproduce hunting commodities, and created artificial scarcities that led to famines. They were transforming a proud, self-sufficient people into a workforce they could exploit. The Ainu weren't just losing their economic independence, they were losing their connection to the land that had sustained them for centuries. The cultural pressure was just as systematic. Buddhist temples appeared in Ainu territories not just to offer spiritual guidance, but to undermine traditional beliefs and practices. Ainu were given Japanese names for administrative purposes, their movement was regulated, and their dress codes were controlled to maintain clear social hierarchies. The message was clear: to survive in this new world, you had to become Japanese. Your language, your customs, your very identity, these were obstacles to be overcome, not treasures to be preserved. What makes this story even more complex is that the Ainu response wasn't unified. This is where the historical record gets really fascinating, because it shows us that resistance isn't always a simple good versus evil narrative. The Ainu were dealing with their own internal divisions, conflicts between different groups that the Japanese were more than happy to exploit. Some Ainu communities tried to migrate north to avoid Japanese control. Others engaged in secret trading with Russians or other foreign partners. Some maintained their traditional practices in hidden ways, a form of quiet cultural defiance. But the most dramatic resistance came in the form of armed uprisings. Now, Ghost of Yōtei is set before the major revolts that would shake the region, but it's placing us right on the eve of that violence. The most famous of these was Shakushine's revolt, which began in 1669. It actually started as a feud between two Ainu groups over hunting resources, but it quickly transformed into something much bigger, a coordinated effort to reclaim political independence and control over trade terms. Shakushine, the leader of one faction, managed to unite multiple Ainu tribes against the Japanese, spreading rumors that rival chiefs had been poisoned by the Matsumai clan and turning local grievances into a broader struggle for freedom. Here's what's really striking about these revolts. They weren't desperate last stands by a defeated people. They were strategic military campaigns led by skilled warriors who understood both guerrilla warfare and political organization. The Ainu had access to firearms, they had knowledge of the terrain, and they had every reason to believe they could win. The fact that they ultimately failed doesn't diminish the courage it took to resist or the real possibility that things could have gone differently, but the internal divisions were real and they were devastating. Some Ainu groups chose to side with the Japanese to secure better trade deals for themselves. Others were caught between competing loyalties, trying to protect their own communities while watching their neighbors suffer. The Japanese were skilled at exploiting these divisions, offering incentives to some groups while punishing others, creating a climate of mistrust that made unified resistance nearly impossible. From the Japanese perspective, this was all perfectly logical. The Tokugawa Shogunate wasn't just expanding for the sake of expansion. They were securing resources, defending borders, and establishing control over what they saw as rightfully Japanese territory. The Matsumai clan emphasized the Ainu's foreignness and barbaric appearance to justify their role as intermediaries and defenders of civilization. They framed their expansion as a civilizing mission, bringing order to chaos and prosperity to a backward region. The strategic calculations were sound. Ezo was rich in natural resources, salmon, herring, animal pelts, and other commodities that were highly valued on the mainland. Control over Ainu territories provided a buffer zone against potential Russian expansion, which was already a concern even in the early 17th century. The economic benefits were substantial enough that the Matsumai clan was exempt from paying rice tribute to the shogunate, a significant privilege that shows how valuable this frontier was considered. But here's what makes this period so historically significant. It served as a testing ground for techniques that Japan would later use in its imperial expansion across Asia. The methods of economic control, cultural assimilation, and political subordination that were developed in Ezo became a blueprint for later colonial endeavors. This wasn't just a regional conflict, it was a laboratory for empire building that would have consequences far beyond the shores of Hokkaido. The genius of setting Ghost of Yōtei in 1603 is that it captures this moment of possibility when the Ainu still had agency and the outcome wasn't predetermined. It's not a story about inevitable defeat, it's about a people who fought back when they still had the power to do so. The ghost in the title becomes a metaphor for more than just one person's quest for revenge. It represents the ghost of Ainu sovereignty, the ghost of a culture that was about to be systematically suppressed, and the ghost of a world where indigenous peoples could still determine their own fate. This connects to something much larger about how we understand history and resistance. Too often we tell stories about colonization as if it was inevitable, as if indigenous peoples were simply swept away by superior technology and organization. But 1603 Ezo shows us a different reality, a moment when the balance of power was still contested, when resistance was not just possible but effective, and when the choices individuals made could genuinely alter the course of history. The Ainu people's story doesn't end with the events that Ghost of Yōtei depicts, of course. Their struggle for recognition and rights continues to this day, and their culture has survived despite centuries of suppression. But by focusing on this crucial moment in 1603, the game has the potential to illuminate a chapter of history that's been largely forgotten, to honor the memory of people who fought for their freedom when they still had the power to do so. Think about how this resonates with contemporary struggles for indigenous rights around the world. The techniques of economic control, cultural assimilation, and political subordination that were pioneered in Ezo in colonial encounters across the globe. The internal divisions that weakened Ainu resistance mirror the challenges faced by indigenous peoples everywhere who must balance survival with resistance, accommodation with defiance. The very fact that we're telling this story through a video game, a medium that allows us to experience agency and choice, makes it a powerful vehicle for exploring these themes. This is why Ghost of Yōtei matters beyond just being an entertaining samurai adventure. It's an opportunity to engage with a forgotten chapter of Japanese history, to understand the real human cost of imperial expansion, and to honor the memory of people who refused to surrender their identity without a fight. The ghost haunting Mount Yōtei isn't just seeking personal revenge, it's carrying the weight of a culture's struggle for survival, the echo of a people's cry for justice, and the enduring power of those who resist, even when the odds are stacked against them. The year 1603 marked the beginning of the end for Ainu independence, but it also marked the beginning of a resistance that would echo through centuries. In that frozen landscape beneath the mountain, the Ainu called Machine Shiri, the seeds of both oppression and defiance were planted in the same soil. Ghost of Yōtei isn't just inviting us to witness that moment, it's asking us to understand what was lost, what was preserved, and what continues to haunt the places where cultures clash and empires rise.